Okay, IDA Housing Committee called to order. We don't technically, I think, have a chair. Does someone want to chair the meeting?
Sure. I know how to do that in my sleep.
Okay, so I did send the agenda packet and I just sort of put my notes in there. I thought it would be easier that way. And I think I'm going to ask if we could add an agenda item to talk about the fee payment and when the fee payment is required and outlining that in the policy.
Good idea. And that comes up because yesterday, Heather, you want to report on what the IDA did yesterday?
Sure. The McKinley project, which is BVSHF LLC, the project in my parking lot at 401 East State Street, had opted to pay the housing fee up front. And then when the project costs increased, the units decreased, the numbers didn't really work for them in terms of their operating budget and their construction budget. So they asked me if they could pay it over the first 3 years of operation, which we had done with the first two projects. And I said, yes. The IDA said, oh, no, that's not an administrative decision. The IDA should make that decision. So we're in a position with McKinley where they've already closed. And so we'll be figuring out what to do about that and how to come to some compromise that meets their budget and meets the needs of the Community Housing Development Fund over the nearer term. I see Megan is smiling. I expected you to smile on that. So my mistake that I administratively did that. And we want to just make sure that it's in the policy so that that kind of confusion doesn't happen again.
Yeah, Megan, I was going to call you later about that. But the issue really was there have been two other projects that we sort of negotiated at the IDA meeting about extending the payments out. So there was some precedent for that, but it was still an IDA decision. And so it got, that got wrapped up. And John Guttridge pointed out helpfully that in the policy, it actually says a one-time upfront payment. So that's what happened yesterday. So I was thinking we should add that as a topic as well, but we can do that at the end, I think. Thanks, Heather, for the update. So maybe we'll just start. Everybody has the agenda, I assume. If we just start with number 1, the short-term rental language. The IDA will not deliver incentives to housing projects that include short-term rentals defined as residential or non-commercial structures used for transient lodging with occupancy under 30 consecutive days. So discussion. Yeah, Heather.
That was language that I worked with Nick Helmholt at the county planning to make sure that it was consistent with, what he's using and all of the stuff that the county is doing.
Okay, discussion. Oh, really nothing?
I support that change. It makes sense. We don't want to be encouraging, short-term rental properties.
Yeah, makes me pretty nervous. John.
I guess, so we do incentivize hotels, right? I mean, we've done so a number of times in the past. And I don't know, I guess I'm sort of curious what the, on the scale that IDA is operating, I would expect that any project that would come before us would either be long-term rentals rented to, individuals, things like these apartment buildings that we're incentivizing, or hotels. And I kind of don't see where we would find an instance where somebody's going to come with a project that actually even covers this policy. And I'm really only asking, I think this is a good idea. I'm asking this question because we might want to be careful about how we craft the policy to make it make some sense in both of those cases. Does that make sense?
The hotels would be a commercial, so they wouldn't fall under residential. So if it were truly a hotel, an extended stay kind of situation, it would be classified as commercial. So those would still be eligible as long as they were in that density zone that we deliver to. This has come up with, city center and some of the bigger residential projects. And we've asked specifically, will there be short-term rentals? Will you do Airbnb if you're unable to rent units? And, they've assured us, and I think with city center, even they showed me in their mortgage documents, like they're not allowed to Airbnb it. And it's not something that they want to do, but we just wanted to, I think the IDA wanted to make sure that, if there was a situation where someone was buying a property, building a property, and it would be solely short-term rental, that we wouldn't be in a position where they would fall under our policy and be able to receive some sort of incentive.
Right, unless it's a hotel.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I mean,
my reason to bring this up. Okay, were you finished, John?
Yeah, I'm fine.
My reason to bring this up was really more along, not that a developer would have that as any part of the plan, but that their tenants, they would rent to tenants, and then the tenants would turn around and start using the apartments as Airbnbs. I don't think that if that's what the IDA wants to do, then that's a discussion, which I guess we're having now. I don't think we should. And I think what I would actually like to see some sort of clawback language in this that says that if there are complaints about Airbnb, if we become aware that they're being used and apartments are being used, then that will be, not sure what the consequence is. They have to shut that down, or they have to, or there's a clawback even of abatements. I think there are so many disadvantages, so many problems that directly affect the housing market for the massive growth of Airbnbs, is that we certainly should not be encouraging development of units that are classically popular for Airbnb. So that's the idea here. And then it's very different from hotels or extended stay hotels. Laura, and then John again.
Thanks, Martha. Yeah, some of what you said is exactly my concern. We want to make this clear to developers as they're proposing a project, and we want developers to make it clear to their tenants that they cannot go ahead and Airbnb their units. And that would be something that I want to make sure, I would want to see that there not be something that kind of, there's a gap or a loophole, because I agree that we don't want to support or incentivize short-term rentals in projects supported by the IDA.
Thanks, Laura. John?
Yeah, so I think the answer here is to actually just put in the policy that any project subsidized by the IDA, any housing project subsidized by the IDA shall include lease restrictions preventing short-term rentals by tenants. And some kind of language that just says like, and the owner operators can't do it either. But I think if we put that requirement in there, it's very simple language. Most people's leases included already. Your landlords mostly, don't want their tenants doing Airbnb. So I think that this is going to be friendly to most projects and should be relatively easy for us to get people to agree to. And I think, Martha, on the subject of clawbacks, as I think we've said a number of times on recent discussions about our policies, any violation of any of our policies provides an opportunity for clawback. So if we have a problem, that's something that the IDA certainly can and should consider.
Thanks, John. Nels?
Yeah, I agree with John's approach, which I think is similar to what a lot of people have said, but I guess I want to be clear that I'm not opposed to the idea of the IDA delivering incentives to a custom designed short-term rental property. An extended hotel would be an example of that, but it could also be a building built just for short-term rentals, because that would be a great way to move the pressure out of neighborhoods into a designated area where a community would allow it. In some respects, the project in Inland Island is talking about that idea a little bit. And I think that would be a pretty good spot for short-term rentals, and may take some pressure off of East Hill or some other areas where we're having more and more neighborhood concerns. So I just wanted to be clear that I hope we're not prohibiting all short-term rental projects, just the ones that are disguising as residential projects.
Just residential projects. I've had a couple of conversations with the developer of Inlet Island, and it would be a commercial, it would be a commercial development. It would be classified as such, that kind of thing.
Right.
I assume that being classified as commercial would bring along all other kinds of requirements and regulations, et cetera. Okay.
Yeah, and I use City Center as an example because I've had experience with it in several conversations with the management team and the developer over there. That the bank prohibited it in their financing, and it's in all their leases that you can't sublease. And is there going to be a bad actor that's over there, subleasing their apartment while they're, gone for a month, and the management team finds out and, sanctions them? Is that, the IDA is going to terminate the pilot because, someone broke their lease and management is trying to be on top of it?
No. I wasn't suggesting that level of consequence. Laura?
Yeah, I think this distinction between commercial and residential is key. And to John's point, all policies, violation from any IDA policies could result, will not automatically, but could result in a clawback. And, I, for one, am very enthusiastic about the Inlet Island Hometel, and we may see more projects similar to that. If it's built with that design explicit and it's identified, it's classified, categorized as commercial, that makes sense. I think we're all in agreement that we want to avoid the arrangements that are not as clear, as transparent.
So could I just propose, in addition to my proposed language, adding John's language about any housing project receiving incentive will include tenant restrictions and leases? Is that?
Yeah.
That sounds good. John, since that was your next anyway, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, just, for, perhaps to move the discussion along a little bit, the distinction between residential and a hotel use is actually built into the building code. You can't, you can't actually build a residential structure the same way for transient folks. I mean, there's sort of an expectation that people that live there, have an easier time finding the exits and other sort of things like that make for it's actually like two different sections of the code depending on how long people are expected to live there. So I don't think we actually need to police that at all. I think just saying, put the lease restriction in, and, to Heather's point, it's gonna the financing companies aren't gonna want the risk. The building department isn't gonna let somebody build a residential building for, on the scale we're talking about. It's really I think where the primary risk of this is a problem is in duplexes, single family homes, 60-unit properties, the kind of stuff that just is not going to be before the IDA. So I think we've got a good solution here that makes clear what we're trying to do. And I don't think we have to work super hard at it beyond that.
Okay, that sounds good. I guess clawback of the whole property tax abatement is pretty extreme. I guess there might be, I'm just wondering if there's if there are other kind of consequences. And I don't know that the IDA really has any, just sort of like a one-time fine or anything like that. But
I mean, we can send our lawyers to go hassle them and then send them bills for our lawyers to go hassle them, right? And
Yes.
I think ultimately clawback's like the big hammer. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot that happens between here and there. Nobody really wants to be halfway down that path either. Well, almost no one. With
Okay.
one notable exception.
Right. Okay, then if there's nothing else on number one, then that sounds like we've taken care of that one.
Should we
Um,
officially vote to forward that to the IDA board for consideration?
If this is okay with everybody, after discussion today, I'll go ahead and mark up the policy, email it out. If it seems like, there might be minor, verbiage changes or something, we can do that via email. If we're all okay with it, I'll send it to the IDA for the next meeting. If something comes up via email that, needs further discussion, I'll call another meeting of the committee. Does that sound good?
Yeah, wordsmithing in a committee is not a great idea. Thanks, Heather. That's great. Number two, the potential for increasing the area where the idea will deliver incentives for housing projects. And Megan, I'm really glad you're on here. And Heather, do you want to put up the map perhaps, or does either Megan or Heather want to just introduce this? Everybody on this call, and maybe the public doesn't know, but everybody in the meeting knows that the IDA, the housing incentives are only available for the limited area in the city of Ithaca, which we extended last year or two to the sort of waterfront area. But that is, was basically a very limited area within the city of Ithaca. So Megan and Heather, along with Susan Landfried, who's since left the county, did look at the development focus areas as a possible extension of this policy. Are you able to get the map, Heather?
Yeah.
Okay. Megan, go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to say I can't screen share, but I've got the map. It's helpful.
Okay.
I've got it. Let's see. I have too many things open and I can't find it. There it is.
All right. Thank you very much.
Can you see that?
Yeah, not the whole thing. Can you sort of back out a little bit?
What's going on here? Can you see that?
Not the whole thing. No, we're still just seeing like from Stewart Park North.
The top half of the document that shows.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Not changing, Heather.
It's the same.
Can you let Megan share?
Yeah. It's all yours, Megan.
Okay, you know what? I might start actually with a different.
Yeah, I had two maps.
Yeah, I'll start and then we can zoom in. Let me start with this one.
So while she's doing that, I can just say, we looked at, this map with all the focus areas, villages, hamlets, all these smaller focus areas. And, just in discussion, the ability of any of those areas to support, multi-story, multi-unit development that would be large enough to make the finances work and benefit from an IDA abatement. It seemed like it was really that urbanized area, which is the pink. A lot of those nodes just, don't have the zoning, are not, really prime for development to the scale. I mean, I always say the IDA is a great tool if it's a big project. For little projects, it's just not a great tool. The costs and the administration are just too much on both ends.
So when
what's a small project we'd see in terms of like the gross dollar cost? I mean, I'm thinking about like 327 West Seneca as a $1.5 million project or something like that.
He's saving $100,000 over 7 or 10 years, and his fees were probably 25,000.
I mean, that's not nothing. And you think about somebody's total financing stack, and that was a 10 or 11 unit project. I could see a building of that scale going up in Brookendale or, downtown. I mean, certainly downtown Dryden has some sort of buildings of roughly that size.
And I thought about, when I read this, I thought, oh, I really like the idea of trying to densify these nodes. And I did think about, say, townhomes or 2 or 3 story buildings that really could be, I mean, I think when we think of the future, we're going to have to envision more stories in these nodes. And I also was wondering about the scattered site approach for 4% tax credit projects. And Megan, we had talked about this at the housing fund. So how does that fit into this conversation?
I want to address sort of the small unit projects. 327 West Seneca fit at the time with our housing policy. I mean, I had one 16 unit project in Lansing that, was less than a $2 million project. His rents are less than, what you would find in the city of Ithaca. They're pretty much affordable, but it's not technically affordable housing. And we went back and forth and back and forth. I probably spent 30 hours meeting with this guy, going through his financial projections, trying to, figure out the IDA incentive. I mean, the value of that property in Lansing, the assessment was so low that he was saving maybe $10,000 a year. And he wouldn't even recoup his upfront costs at the IDA without the housing payment in the first 3 years. Like, it made no sense. Like, he was like, yeah, no, this is not going to work. So as much as we would like to say, oh, we'll deliver for a 12 unit, when you start looking at the numbers and the values outside the city of Ithaca, they just don't support it. Low value, low property tax payment. And then you add the $5,000 per unit on top of it for the housing payment. It makes no sense. This project out in Lansing, 16 units, what's 16 times 5,000 is $80,000. His total property tax projected incentive was $100,000. He's paying $80,000 up front in a housing payment. Forget it. It's not worth it.
I mean, if he were to go to the county, the Community Housing Development Fund and get some money there, and go to a 4% tax credit and get some money there. And
this is like a teeny little developer. He does, townhomes.
Understood, but
and
this is not the
duplexes.
only developer.
He was not interested at all.
I get it, right? So we have a project that it didn't work for and one that it did. And I don't think that that's a reason to not include these locations in our policy. Like, if, Todd Fox decides that he's going to suddenly pop up a bunch of, 10 unit or 20 unit affordable projects in these rural centers where you can buy land for really cheap and you probably get pretty darn close to Ithaca rents. I think that that's a good thing for us to work on.
Well, I think the tax credit projects will deliver anywhere. I mean, we could put in the policy that for tax credit, either 4 or 9% project will deliver anywhere. We have.
The thing that I'm like wondering is, like, you seem very against the idea of including these locations in the policy, and I see no downside of including them.
The downside for me is that, in my experience, it's a lot of work for no return. And so that's the downside. It's like the administrative piece. Everyone and their dog comes in with, I want a tax abatement. And, you just spend so much time and you show them the numbers that it's a net loss for you, and they still want to push it forward. It just takes a lot of time.
Let me jump in here with two things. One is, at the housing fund, we have tried really hard to support small infill projects and developers who are, like, really with a good heart, really trying to do this. Not nonprofit developers that this is their bread and butter, but the Todd Fox type folks. it really is labor intensive and very difficult to make it succeed. And then the other part of it is when we look at the urbanized area, I think we may recognize that, oh, there's a lot of opportunity here. Areas that I hadn't thought about for multi-story buildings. Let's see what happens there. I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of like leaving the door open on the other nodes, but all is not lost here. I think there's a lot of opportunity if we broaden this to the full urbanized area. Nels?
Yeah, I wanted to try to get back to that question because I wasn't clear that the IDA currently has policy in place that supports affordable residential housing projects anywhere in the county. So if somebody is a for-profit developer and seeks a 4% low-income housing tax credit project, they need the IDA to provide that pilot assistance to make them competitive at the state level. I was under the impression the IDA did not have a policy in place that authorized that applicant to come forward. Is that?
Well, you're right. The policy, we've never had a specific policy, and our housing policy is silent on 100% affordable or tax credit projects. However, every project that's outside of our policy, we've delivered and deviated from the policy. We notify the taxing jurisdictions. There was 210 Hancock. We looked at one with NRP Group in Lansing. We do them, and the IDA has the ability to do that. I mean, part of this is like we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole and have a policy that, says everything and it's very clear, but economic development sometimes has to be on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, no, well, I wonder if there's some benefit to letting developers know that the IDA has a policy that does support that, rather than a one-off negotiation on every single instance, if it really is something that seems to have widespread support. The other issue I think about the expanding the area, it's essentially kind of a CTAP boundary expansion for all residential housing projects, and that probably needs consultation with the host community in each case to make sure they support that. The town of Ithaca, I could see East Hill Plaza being a great spot, but it's not currently in a CTAP area, unlike the town of Lansing. So I just wonder about how to thread that needle as well, and make sure, we have a lot of projects in College Town coming on the pike, and they're all going to seek, they might all seek IDA assistance if we're available. I'm not sure that we'd have general public support for those projects going through, even if it would provide a lot of housing assistance for funds for the Community Development Housing Fund and require local labor, all the other benefits of the program. But maybe it should be a conscious policy to expand the CTAP area rather than coming at it from just a housing recommendation from the committee.
There, Nels, thank you. We do have, that opportunity to provide not an abatement, but a structure for 210 Hancock. So the predictable 30-year agreement is something that should be spelled out maybe more carefully. John?
Yeah, I agree that we should codify. We've done exactly the same thing for all of our for-profit affordable developers. It would probably be pretty easy for us to write that as a policy. And have a bit of a debate around some details. Like I know in one case there was a conversation about whether or not we should cut the fee to what we charge for nonprofits, and we ended up, I think, deciding to not do that. I think it was Art House, if I'm remembering correctly, where they asked us to cut the fee to whatever we charge on NHS, and I think we decided not to do that, but it was a while ago. I don't remember for sure, but like those kinds of things would be nice to have a policy for us to fall back on. And then we also don't have to document deviation from our policy every time. Coming back to the conversation about the urbanized area, I actually agree with Nels. I think that while I would support adding the development focus areas in other communities, I don't actually think it's a good idea for us to expand to this urbanized area. There's a lot of, basically the key reason why we have CTAP is because of the combination of the drastically higher construction costs and substantially higher land costs in the urban core specifically. There's a lot of land on here that doesn't suffer from those two specific circumstances, and where I would describe the kind of development that's going to happen there is largely suburban sprawl. Not all of this area is like that. There's certainly some of it that's more urbanized, but a lot of it, like, if you build something up on Trumansburg Road, that's going to be a lot of cars on our highly congested corridor that's already in there, unless it's built as a specific node with a lot of bus service or some other mitigating factor. It's not really necessarily what we're trying to do here. So I think we want to be careful about the details of this.
Yeah, and I think part of our discussion really was around how do we maximize payments into the housing development fund to support more affordable housing. If we increase the area that we're going to deliver incentives to, we're thereby increasing the potential for payment into that fund. So yeah, it's a balance between the tax base and the support for affordable housing locally.
Nell's made an important point about, the city 20 years ago came to the IDA and said, we want something like this policy. Lansing has come to us for their density policy. And I could argue, Lansing doesn't have particularly high construction costs in their town center. Not sure about the property taxes and whether whether that is such a big issue there. But so in a sense, that was not to mitigate the high cost of building in a dense downtown. That's not their situation. That is, I think their vision is more proactive. We want to create a denser center, and that's the way they were looking at it. In any case, any municipality whether we do a spot CTAP kind of thing, or whether we just extend, the city into the town and the Village of Cuba Heights, we're going to have to talk to municipalities. This is new, right?
Yeah, to be transparent, we want to talk to municipalities, but the IDA has broad power to deliver tax incentives without approval. But yeah, to be transparent, we would want some feedback.
Right, and because also the other, if it's really not welcome, a municipality can just change the zoning so that you can only build a 1-story, 2-story building. So, Megan, you said so much here. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm no tax expert, so weighing the pros and cons of delivering more incentives in more places, versus more money coming into the Community Housing Development Fund. I get that that's a complex piece. I don't know if it would work as well. I had shared the map of our urban center development focus area, because I think, from the county's perspective, we're not really seeking to encourage a lot of development outside those development focus areas. As you could tell from that generalized map, the other nodes in the county, apart from the urban center, are, kind of the generic circles. So they were not parcel defined. So that is something that, we would need to work on from our end if we needed kind of parcel definition. But if you're taking the approach of, wanting to work with the municipality as well, I would imagine most municipalities would have some ideas based off of their comprehensive plans and zoning codes and things, what they're looking for in terms of development within those nodes. The other piece, I don't know if it would be helpful. I could see, maybe having the big blob of this development focus area, to work within to see, where you may want to expand. And I don't know if you would want to do consider some sort of phased process where maybe you want to pursue an initial expansion more in the urban core, and then, ponder kind of next steps if you want to consult with municipalities and things before the IDA just kind of exercises its authority.
Thanks. Jennifer, is it your hand up?
Yeah, I was just curious. I was just curious what's driving the proposal to expand the development area.
I think I kicked off a little bit of the conversation because like Nell said, I did not realize that the IDA had no restrictions in terms of tax credit projects and where it can deliver incentives for those. Because we had through the Community Housing Development Fund, we had met with an assistant commissioner of homes and community renewal, specifically to talk about 4% tax credit projects, which we have not had many of here. But, homes and community renewal is considering this area probably one of the prime, areas that they would foresee more 4% projects happening that could really bump up our housing supply, especially on the affordable side. But given kind of experiences with some recent projects saying, HCR was saying, you really need these IDA incentives. So having that conversation with Heather, she helped me understand that actually there isn't a geographic restriction, which is terrific news. So that kind of settled that side of the question, but then I think led to this conversation about since you all are considering possible tweaks to the housing policy, is this something that you would want to consider? I originally thought, I was asking Heather about, did we need to go back and do some kind of parcel based definition of these nodes in order to provide 4%, 9% projects outside of the city, with these incentives, which turns out not to be necessary, which is great news because I will say, for better or for worse, from homes and community renewal's perspective, they would like to see projects in some of these other nodes on the tax credit side. But I think what you all are needing to consider is where you actually want to deliver incentives to the not fully affordable tax credit projects.
So
Okay, let's make sure among our recommendations is to actually be explicit about that point about 4 and 9% projects anywhere. Heather.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that maybe at this juncture, we clarify the policy to say if it's 100% affordable housing using a 4% or a 9% tax credit, that we will consider them anywhere in the county. And generally it's, a percent, I think it's 12% of NOI is what we do for the term of the state financing, and leave it at that unless extenuating circumstances. We had one that we reduced it a little bit more because HCR said this is what works in the budget, which would have been outside of any policy, but I can sort of, work on some language around that if that makes sense. So then it's really clear about the tax credit projects.
That would be great. Thanks, Heather. John?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about, so if I understand the impetus to do this was, if we might deliver an incentive to, some big housing project, like, a good example might be the Holichuk property, right? Like where there's a big subdivision, a bunch of units going in all at once. If that was rental, that would be in this area now. And then we could say, okay, well, now we'll get this 5,000 per unit to get it to the housing fund. I wonder how that amount compares to what we would get in terms of a tax increment to that project. I mean, in my mind, I actually am guessing, if a developer is going to take that deal, it's because they're going to pay less, paying into the housing development fund the one way than they would the other way, paying the municipalities and the county, at which point, the municipalities and the county could make the decision to divert those funds into that housing fund, rather than, and ends up like the community gets more out of the development. So that seems like kind of a weak argument to expand the area in my mind, unless I don't entirely understand it.
My sense of this is that I would like to see this be a tool that encourages more housing development, like period, in a lot of other places where it's not happening. And by the way, I would certainly, the housing fund, for example, has done townhouses. We've done scattered site programs, which are even single family houses that you put together into a package. So there are different ways to do this. You don't have to think about multi-story buildings. as the only model. So sort of affordable housing can take all different kinds of shapes. So
Yeah, and having been involved in, housing and in this community for 20 years and looking at the production of housing, the current needs assessment shows that, we're still short on all price points, all levels. Our vacancy rates are much lower everywhere in the county than we would like them to be to have a healthy housing market. The rental market is just a piece of that. The IDA can be useful in trying to spur that. I've had lots of discussions with all kinds of developers. From an economic development perspective, I think it's very positive that we weren't seeing any housing development. Then we got local developers to sort of look at developing housing. And it's become something where now we're seeing out of area developers and regional and even, out of state developers looking at not only the tax credit market, but the regular market as well as student housing in our community. Is it enough to get us to where, we have a healthy housing market? Not yet. And I've had lots of conversations with developers, and some have done projects downtown that are looking for other areas. There are areas that, have a large enough parcel that could support rental, multi-story residential development. And the numbers, are tight. I've also had conversations with Cornell. Cornell would like to see more, I would call it affordable, reasonably priced student housing for some of their students, particularly families, grad students, those that, might not be coming from a family that has the wherewithal to pay, $2,000 a month or whatever the going rate is in some of the market rate units. Is there a way to support some of that? Cornell doesn't want to own it. They don't want to build it. They want private developers to build it. Cornell has some land that they could, partner with, like they did up the one that we didn't deliver an incentive to. It's escaping me, just this side of Pine Tree Road.
Maplewood?
Maplewood, yes. They have some land up there. They've been talking to developers for a long time to try and put together a project. And they have said, this is what we want the rents to be. And the developers have come in and said, we can't make the numbers work. And they would be on the tax rolls. Is there opportunity for the IDA to assist with some of that to alleviate some of the housing crisis here? Is sort of where that thought came from.
Before I go to Nels, you mean that one on the other side of Maplewood? There's that site where they took down the townhouses that were like the Abbott. Okay, yeah, that's right. That's been a couple of years closed. Nels?
Well, I'm just thinking, there could be an invitation to communities to see if they, wanted to assist housing projects in consistent with their plans in a couple, one, they could do a CTAP like Lansing did, but there could maybe be a simpler process where, a CTAP light or a housing focused CTAP where communities come forward and say they can identify 2 or 3 development areas where they would encourage housing, and maybe that would facilitate that kind of community supported location for housing. I mean, I can certainly see, looking at the map that was provided, redevelopment of the mall might incorporate housing. I think a lot of people would support some housing there. East Hill Plaza, we mentioned, the King Road connection on Route 96 has long been a targeted area for housing and urbanized development for the town of Ithaca. We identify areas, I think, but I don't, so I wonder, I guess I'm looking at Megan now, would the planning department, be in a position to facilitate, communications with some of those communities that have some potential housing sites to see if there was interest there. And if there was, then maybe it would be appropriate to craft something, hopefully pretty simple, but maybe not, that could address that, because I agree there's a lot of housing potential. We're kind of built out in the city. We still have some sites, but, we'd like to see housing on Route 13 and the residential, the commercial corridor if possible, and to try to make that happen would require some incentives. So that I can see where there would be some interest, but I think it needs to have kind of almost be a little bit of a response to community's interest in doing that. And identify maybe 2 or 3 sites, or something, or locations that are consistent with their plan. And it would be a workload for the county planning office.
Yeah, I will say, especially since we're still short a few planners right now. But we're working on our work program. I think that this is where my guess would be it would make sense to do this kind of jointly, because we're not as involved, with on the IDA side. So it could be an invitation to a conversation and, see which municipalities take us up on it, so that we can talk about, their development focus area, their development goals, especially around housing, and make sure that's aligning, with what, the IDA would be interested in as well. And so for the ones that, kind of indicate that they would like to move forward, we would need to build in some time. Yeah, they may come to the table or want to propose, the specific area based on their zoning and things, which in some cases may completely fall within a development focus area anyway. So there's, not really an issue there. And if we need to do some work, in particular ones. So yeah, I don't know if that would, I know Heather has a work program too. So how this would all fit and how we'd want to approach and kind of launch those conversations.
Well, I wonder if we start small and approach the communities that are in the urbanized area about this kind of a topic. So it would be the city, the town of Ithaca, the village of Cuba Heights, the village of Lansing, maybe town of Lansing. I'd have to look at that urbanized area. I don't think it stretches into other municipalities. It might stretch into the town of Ulysses. I don't think so.
No, not really.
Why don't we take a look at the map?
Yeah, here I can I can share if you'd like, and I'll zoom in and then I can pan around if that makes sense. Let's see.
I was thinking, oh, what about community corners? It's only East Hill Plaza. Cornell spent years on developing terrific plans for East Hill Plaza, and that went away.
I can kind of scroll slowly. This map's a little bit more zoomed in so you can see the actual streets, but where we're talking, feel free to tell me if you want to go to one end or the other, but I can completely understand that this is not necessarily as far as, the idea would want to expand. I think it's more of a starting place.
Nels, when you said Route 13, where did you mean?
I was thinking the retail corridor. We're always trying to convince somebody to convert a parking lot or do a multi-story project rather than single-story retail.
In the Southwest?
In the Southwest, yeah, we haven't had much success with that, but someday the numbers may work for that, or somebody may pursue that idea. Some of those properties along Route 13 have seen, the value of the building is pretty low relative to the land value. We could see some interest there at some point. It's not in the CTAP, of course, right? So
right.
So maybe that's an initial step, is if you wanted to start with the city and having the CTAP conversation.
Yeah, but I'm seeing this as kind of a housing focused kind of discussion, though, not just opening up the CTAP to any project that comes forward, but it have to incorporate significant housing.
In other words, CTAP allows hotels and offices and health clubs, and you were talking about housing, right?
Right.
Well, this is interesting. We could always run this up the flagpole and see who salutes, and sort of put this out, whether we draw a map that has either this area or more targeted ideas within the city and the inner core, and kind of maybe run it by some developers to see if they would have, if a tax abatement would make any difference. It seems like this is looking like a longer conversation than just redrawing the map, obviously.
Oh, would it be helpful if maybe I just put together sort of a concept paper and some background information? We use the urbanized core map and maybe start having some discussions with those municipalities.
Yeah, I think we should definitely run this by city planning and get their feedback.
Well, Jennifer's here.
Maybe start with the city and then move town.
Well, I know that the Village of Lansing has long been like talking about the mall with kind of no way to move anything forward there. I think that's a huge opportunity. East Hill Plaza and King Road. I think we should talk to the town and the Village of Lansing. And I don't know about community corners. If there has been conversation about that redeveloping that whole area. I could certainly see, 3-story apartments within that little parking lot area that is just asphalt and 1-story buildings right now. It should be more.
The Village of Cuba Heights has been very anti, and it's owned by one person. So, or a family of 6. So if they don't want to redevelop it, it's not going to be redeveloped. And I think that's what we're seeing at the mall. But, there are some other sites. There's a Cornell owned site on, I want to say it's Upland. It's not Upland Road, but it's over
Cinema Drive,
by the swimming club behind Cinema Drive. That is for sale. That they would like to see residential, multi-story. There are other apartment complexes up in that area, and every developer that I've talked to, I've seen their financials. They can't make it work. And there's water, there's sewer, there's a brand new sidewalk.
There's Varna, the land that's been gone through several iterations, sort of up the hill from 366. I know, and the town, and Megan and I are just in a conversation with two of the town board members. They want to start a housing committee. They'd really like to do something proactive. So the town of Dryden might actually be a place to start as well.
So maybe in terms of the urbanized area as well as the town of Dryden, because there could be some of those areas there.
So this is not just more work for Heather and Megan. How do we do this? What's the best way to try to do something here? Megan, Heather, you said you might put together a paper,
I can work with Megan a little bit. If your supervisor puts it in your work plan, and we can put together a little bit of a concept paper, and then this committee could work with us to have those conversations with the municipalities.
I mean, it seems like if there's a package that we can send out to the ones that we want to approach first. As a starting place, so they can consider and then see which are most interested in starting the conversation, because we can't do everything probably at once, but kind of build the coalition of the willing, see how it works or what concerns arise. And then that can inform the ones that, maybe down the road, if you decide to pursue further, that might be a little bit more reluctant initially. Everybody likes to jump on a successful bandwagon, I think. So I will say, to the extent we can keep this kind of within boundaries from our ends. We're functioning without a housing planner and an energy planner and things in our department. So things are stretched right now. So if there's a way to kind of put a package together and have that be the starting point, and then, spend time in the conversations where they're really needed. And I am not a tax expert, so we can, from our department's end, we can mainly contribute in terms of kind of the other county goals in terms of the development focus area strategy and those sorts of things.
So one benefit about being more targeted about locations, was it John, you brought up College Town, you're right. We could easily see those many hundreds of units, if it's just in the new CTAP area, how are we gonna say no to that one when there's obviously a lot of money behind that already, so.
Yeah, all those projects that got built up there have done so without incentive. And as a result, the tax rate in the city has declined, meaning, we just made housing more affordable for all the existing homeowners. And that's a pretty profound reality when you think about it. It's like, we want to be careful not to change that. We just made every housing unit in the city a little bit more affordable. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it is a bit of a misnomer when you talk about tax abatements. I mean, you're phasing in the new taxes. So if you're able to affect a project that wouldn't have otherwise happened, then there's new tax base in year one. My big example is the Marriott. They were paying $4,000 in property tax on a vacant piece of land. In year one, they paid $110,000 in property taxes. That's new tax base, new property tax, and it phases in over 10 years instead of hitting all at once. So yes, there is an abatement, but in terms of, taxes, they're paying new property taxes that wouldn't otherwise be paid.
Yeah, and I think, that's why we're all here, right? We all buy into that. And I think that there's an understanding that in different areas, that picture is pretty different. And it's far better than that to get 100% in year one, which we clearly, every indication is the projects keep getting built up there, right? There are new ones happening right now without any help. So, I think we're all on that page. It's just a question of, we shouldn't just give it away, right? It should be necessary to make the projects happen.
Yeah, and I know, I've had Todd Fox has called me a number of times on his projects up on the way to IC. He can't make the numbers work. Like they haven't happened because he can't make the numbers work. And I've said, sorry, outside CTAP. Nope, can't do it. I won't even look at his numbers.
He's in the ground on one of them right now. So
yeah, he made that one work. Okay.
And that was not simple. He jumped through some hoops to get that one done.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Megan and Heather, for sort of taking all this in and working on the next step. We really, really appreciate that. And, obviously, I guess send a draft out to this group. And we may want to think about, do we want to set up some regular meetings for this group if that would be useful. All right, number 3, discuss aligning IDA payment amount with local subsidy required for tax credit projects. And so this is the question about 4% versus 9%. Heather or Megan, you want to bring us up to speed on this one?
I'm going to pass the buck to the housing expert in the county planning department.
I will say, in terms of our conversations around 4% tax credit projects, Nels did a terrific, research talking with some of our local developers, and we found that, the range of incentives can vary greatly. Also from the state's end, they couldn't give us a magic number per se. So from the Community Housing Development Fund end, we're anticipating basically needing to work with the state and kind of figure out on a case by case basis, what 4% projects really need to be viable. So I know that makes it more difficult to say that there's a specific number per unit in terms of, the IDA policy. That's the magic number. Of course, we're always trying to leverage as much as we can, and tax credits tend to be the biggest source of leverage for affordable housing. But I also recognize, and this is where I rely on Heather's expertise in terms of where, the IDA housing policy, if it tips the balance from a project moving forward or not, sort of thing.
Yeah, it really, it's that square peg in a round hole. Like you want everything to be the same box, but it's not. Like there's so many different variables in the financial picture and the pro formas for a project that there is no magic number. The developers that are coming to the IDA with housing, they're balking. The McKinley project, $1.6 million is 1% of their project costs. add that to their equity, they're having a hard time. I mean, the McKinley was the one that I was like, oh, wow, they're going to pay it up front, looking at their construction budget and their financing. And when the project costs increased by 14 million, they were like, we can't go back to our investors. And I appreciate when people say, oh, they have deep pockets. It's not about how wealthy the developer is. It's about if the project works and what the return on investment for the developer is. It's not about what's in their bank account. So, there could be a tipping point at some point.
Nels?
Yeah, we did had a discussion with INHS about, ideally we'd like to have the in lieu fee be sufficient to support the same number or more number of affordable housing units offsite. I mean, that's kind of our goal with this. And we know historically the ratios have been very strong because we've been able to, with modest investments from the Community Housing Development Fund, leverage tax credit projects, 9% tax credit projects, not really 4% tax credit projects yet. So I was in discussion with Joe Bose at INHS about what would be the subsidy needed to create, to subsidize creation of a new 4% tax credit project with a lot of assumptions, as Megan mentioned, and as Heather mentioned, it all depends on a lot of things. Can you get all the state funding you're asking for? Are there other funds that are available? All those things. And what is the size of the project? Because a 4% tax credit project works best when you're around 100 units, which is a large project for us. That's, an art house scale project. And it doesn't work as well on a per unit basis when it's 35 units, more, or even at a Breckenridge of 50 units. So it requires a deeper subsidy to make those work there. And even then they're not, the state may say it just doesn't work from our perspective. So one option is to take a look at we know that there's a neighborhood opposition to projects that are too large in scale, that are all 100% affordable. So Joe helped look at a kind of a 2 parcel project. They would be 50 and 50 units. I think we came up with 80 units total. I think he was looking at like one on Inland Island, for example, and another one on a site yet to be identified in the city somewhere. And he came up with, a lot of assumptions. The range of subsidy needed under those scenarios that he was looking at a full year ago now, before we've had all this cost escalation and supply chain issues, was in a range from 16,000 to 35,000. Assuming whether you can get a certain pot of funds from the state or enterprises supporting some funding, those kind of things. So at $25,000 per unit, we're right in the middle of that range right now. With the supply gaps, the supply chain issues and cost escalation, I think it would be the wrong time to increase that fee, because I think it would have a negative impact on projects proceeding while we're still addressing those issues. Both the Green Street garage, parking garage, and the adjacent housing projects are facing some pretty significant cost escalation due to inflation and materials costs. So I imagine other developers, as Heather's already mentioned, are facing the same issues. The other thing to mention, I think, is important, is that if we can subsidize a housing project managed and undertaken by a purpose-built, organization that's focused on affordable housing and managing it, we're going to have a much better success for management for a longer period of time. It won't just be the 20-year period or something. They'll reach down lower in the income scale to get those, for making it more affordable for folks. We won't have the enforcement requirements. Who's going to enforce the policy has always been a big challenge here, because they'll be underneath a state, affordability agreement. So I think there's a lot of things to consider in terms of the benefits of, I think an offsite project built and managed by an organization that's focused on affordable housing has got a lot of advantages over a for-profit developer reluctantly providing those units on their project site. So I think that's another benefit to consider. But all in told, I think that $25,000 needs to be taken a look at on a regular basis to see if it's sufficient. But right now, I think it's debatable. It's not clear that it's not sufficient. And I think we need to work on the 4% tax credit project to expand that pool. And before we start modifying, I'd rather creep up than turn off the faucet and have no projects go forward and then have to come back down, which is what Burlington, Vermont did. They had a much higher number that they required, but they found out that they had hit the number too high and they had to back down. So,
Yeah, thanks to Teresa for resharing some of that correspondence with you, was that a year ago, whenever it was. Because I noted the Burlington example. So all this to say that kind of hold tight where we are, and continue to see how we can tweak the program as we've discussed in the previous discussion, to try to continue to incentivize more housing development in general. And as that increases tax base and increases supply, it's a long, slow process, but just continue on the road. That's what I hear from the three of you. Other voices?
I just want to mention, we should be really proud of this policy and what it's done. Is it ever going to do everything we want it to? Probably not. But just in a year, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects that we incentivized in about a year and a half through the IDA, 1,000 new units of housing, 243 of those are affordable units. $2.7 million is going into the Community Housing Development Fund. That's 2.7 million more than they were expecting. It will be over a period of about 4 years, but that's pretty impressive in a year and a half.
I agree with that 100%. I think it's huge. We did a lot of work to get here. I mean, this committee, and Heather, your staff. So that's something that should be commended. And I think I'll just second Nelson's comments about I think we should look at it regularly, but I think our number's in the right place for now.
The original discussions we had about what the fee should be was very much around what's the balance. We don't want to discourage development. So
yeah, if we set it too high and nobody comes to us, then we get nothing.
Right.
And I think that's something that we need to be sensitive to. One thing that I've been thinking about since our discussion yesterday around the timing of the fee is that as it's written, if we are considering allowing it over the first 3 operating years, and it's exactly the same money over the first 3 operating years, and all that has to happen is the developer has to say, "Ooh, I'm having a hard time coming up with this," before they just get that. Of course, 100% of the projects are going to do that. I would argue for essentially charging essentially a financing charge, or some kind of an increment where it's cheaper to pay it at the outset than it is over time, and then the developers can make their own decision about the whether it's their cost of financing. It's like if they're sitting on a lot of cash, they're going to pay it up front. If they're not sitting on a lot of cash and it's then they pay it over time. I think that there's it makes a huge difference to get the money now rather than later. There's no housing right now, and to say, okay, some of this money will come in 5 years from today, and that's a big difference to the community. Referencing my earlier comment, like we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and get nothing. But I think that we should make it different, whether they pay now or later.
let me I agree with you, and I think appropriate to jump to this conversation. Let me do a time check. Are people okay with staying a little bit longer? I think nobody's left yet. That's good. All right.
I'm okay.
Let's push on. Thank you. I was thinking about that yesterday in the IDA meeting, John. You're right. And especially when construction is, probably 18 months. And then so you're not even starting the payments, maybe 2 years into, from the date of approval, you're starting that clock 2 years out. And so then if it's a 3-year payment schedule, yeah, you got 5 years. So what's the cost of money over that period of time? The idea of making it cheaper up front, whether you make it cheaper up front, like discount it up front, or add something on the out years.
Yeah, no, I meant it should cost them less to do it now than later, not that it should be cheaper than it is right now if they do it up front. That was just my
Mo-
apologies.
What's the cost of capital? If they're gonna finance it, their interest rate is what, 5%?
Right.
Is it less than that these days? But we know interest rates are gonna go up. So if you
All over the
say
place, yeah.
pay up front, or if you're gonna pay over the first 3 operating years, it's 5% more.
5% per annum, right? It should be like, if you paid it at closing and then, there would be interest accrued and compounded over the first 2 years when you're in construction, maybe even much longer than that if your construction period delays. And then your first 3 operating years, like it's not just a 5% difference. That's probably like 15 or 18% total if you amortize it out.
Like if we were the bank.
Yeah. And I mean, right, they can get it from us, they can get it from the bank. They probably get it cheaper from the bank, and then we get the money sooner and we get the housing units built.
Well, what we're finding is that the banks aren't financing as it is. And then when they want more money to finance a project, they just can't make the numbers work. I mean, that's what we're finding. They just can't do it.
Right. I mean, well, they can't do it without adding additional equity.
Right.
Which, I mean, if you look at current experience, they just do that. Right.
Oh, they just do that to a point. When their ROI hits 3% the first 8 years, they're like, yeah, I'm out.
I mean, I don't think that that's what we're actually seeing, though. It's like we've seen these projects spiral in cost and they are still building them. I mean, the people aren't actually walking away. I think that the dynamics of those investment decisions are changing drastically. Private equity has a tremendous amount of capital right now, and they're making riskier bets. They're buying into things that have far lower rates of return. So I think that a lot of the conventional wisdom around the kind of return numbers is changing pretty drastically right now.
I
mean,
will
we have
say,
2 projects in front of us right now.
Probably about every 5 projects I talk to, one might come to the IDA. I mean, projects are not happening. I mean, developers are looking at projects and they can't make the numbers work, and they are walking downtown in Lansing, in Dryden, in the town of Ithaca. That happens. I mean, we don't see it because we're not bringing those projects and they're not getting denied, but it's happening.
Well, we want, I mean, it's fine if projects happen without the IDA. If there are projects on the bubble that don't happen because we're not the right fit, and then they really don't happen, then that balance is, maybe in the wrong place. Nels?
I agree with both you, Martha, and John, that there should be some incentive to make the payment earlier than later, and not just an automatic, delay of first 2 years with no payment, then, payment once a year for 3 years or something. I'm not sure whether picking an interest rate just out of the air is the right way to go, though, or assuming 5%, because it's going to move. So it would make more sense to do something that was like the 10-year treasury bill plus 150 basis points, or, the way that the banks look at it is they look at what their cost of money is and they add some additional. And I, generally speaking, even if it was 3%, that's going to add up after 5 years. I don't know if we have to push it to the maximum to encourage them to take it from bank financing. We can be the lender too and get that benefit. It actually could be a benefit to have it, accrue to a higher amount for the Community Housing Development Fund rather than to a lender. So,
Cool.
trying to find a middle ground, I guess. Yeah.
Could we make it easier on me? Like, I don't want to be compounding interest and
I'll give you a
all of
spreadsheet that
this.
just does it.
But do we make it, here's the fee. If you're going to pay it the first 3 years of operating, it's this percentage amount more. Like, can we just make it very straightforward so that, it's not one more variable that everyone has to figure out later? I mean, I'm looking at McKinley, $1.6 million fee. If you added 5%, it's another $80,000. Like, is that too much? Is that too little?
Yeah, too little, way too little.
10%? 160,000?
Yeah, I tell you what, this is like trying to write something with a committee. Maybe Nels and Heather, can we give you the homework of figuring out something that might make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should at least do the amortization table once or twice, just to sort of see what it actually would look like if they borrowed the money. And we should make it comparable to that. If we want to do it with a fixed percentage number, I think that's fine, but it should be comparable to that. The other thing is, like, my expectation is you're going to find that, you know, if you come back and you say, well, you know, it's a sum total of, like, it should be somewhere around 18 to 20% by the time you do the compounding. More to do it paid over these three, you're going to have somebody come back to you and say, well, what if I give you, you know, 40% of it now, and then these, you know, whatever other payments, like, et cetera, because developers are, like, they're working with an incredibly complicated financing model that is, every one of them's different. It's dependent on their investors' goals and, you know, their bank's costs today and blah, 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 blah. So I think you're going to see a lot of variation in this in what the developers actually want to do. That may be advantageous to us to work with, because we could get, you know, 40, 50% upfront, and then, you know, get those housing units to the pipeline and also make some interest, as it were, on the delay.
John, do you want to work with Heather and Joe and Nels on this?
Sure.
My little brain is exploding.
Okay.
You see it? The back of it's on the wall.
Here's some other language we probably should think about putting into the policy. Right now it says, you know, that the fee will be paid up front. It should probably be, you know, any deviation from that needs a vote by the IDA, which is kind of where we went around yesterday. So that's just a language change. How about, you know, we're assigning homework here. How about we move on to, and I'd like to end by 12:30. Discussion of expanding the policy to include student housing.
I'm happy to table that discussion.
Okay.
Given our urbanized area discussion, I don't want more work at this point. I can't put it on my workload.
Okay. Do you want to just give us a couple sentences of what you were thinking?
Well, you know, it was, and I think I said it in the other discussion, you know, there's been conversations about, you know, wanting more reasonably priced student housing, that, you know, Cornell does own land that they would like developers to build on and set rents lower. And they've put those parameters into some of those projects. They look at them as sort of doing a land lease situation, like they've done in the Cornell Business and Technology Park. Cornell owns the land, the developer owns the improvement, manages the improvement. Cornell's not in the business of student housing. So it makes sense for Cornell, but they have a hard time with the developers trying to make the numbers work at this artificial lower rent. You know, I wouldn't say we want to do a policy for Cornell. We want to do a policy that makes sense, that there's adequate student housing, so it alleviates the pressure on the rest of the housing market in areas where it makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't see a scenario where there was a developer that was going to build market rate. You know, our rents are $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, that could benefit from that. Like, I wouldn't want to see that happening, but you know, there are some, maybe it happens on a case by case basis where, you know, we sort of look at them and see if it makes sense. I don't know.
I'm a little nervous about, I agree on the grad student type housing, the family housing, that there's, those are folks who are in the community. Much more than undergrads. I would certainly want to make, I would be very unhappy actually about a policy that supported undergrad type housing, when Cornell has made a commitment to provide housing on campus, or whatever on campus means. And if that's their land and they want to do it, then okay. But that this has been a years-long struggle to get Cornell to take responsibility for their undergraduate population. And I would not be in favor of helping them out with that. That's their commitment. Grad student, professionals, the professional schools, et cetera. Yes, families want to live in neighborhoods and not on campus. And I think that's That's correct. You know, they can do stuff this minute on their own. I mean, when they were talking about East Hill Plaza, I remember conversations like, well, why don't they just, that would be a phenomenally economically productive development. What's the holdup? Why don't they could just hand that to a developer that probably could make a lot of money doing something like this, and Cornell could structure a deal. So I think they have a lot of opportunities if they were to take the initiative. I think it's a good conversation to have. Maybe we'll bring Jeremy Thomas in. But I certainly think maybe they feel they don't have the staff bandwidth to work on that kind of a project, which I would understand. But
so this goes back to Tom Lavigny. When he was at Cornell Real Estate, there were the projects up off of Hannes Lane, up in that area that they looked at with several developers, couldn't make the numbers work, tried to do affordable housing with INHS. I have talked to a number of developers that responded to the RFP on Abbott's property, and it it doesn't work. Like, one would think that it would work, but I've seen, I can't tell you how many pro formas.
Well, I mean, I guess, Martha, if I'm understanding your perspective on this, what you're saying is we understand that the numbers, you know, sort of a straight development project with sort of partially subsidized rents don't really work. But our expectation is that Cornell would be the one to fill that gap because it's, you know, their undergraduate student population rather than the community filling that gap. Is that kind of what you're saying, Martha?
yeah, I don't, yeah. I mean, I think that Cornell has a role here, and their whole north side development was sort of, they, you know, rolled that out with great flourish about how we're going to take care of our students' housing needs. And the promise was, you know, first year and second year students should be able to get housing on campus, period, full stop.
Yep,
And,
no, I totally agree.
And that that they would not, once they finally met the existing need, they wouldn't add enrollment without adding beds. They have already added enrollment, and they have projections to continue to increase enrollment, and the beds aren't even open yet. The current need still isn't met, and they're adding students to the population. So you know, it'll be a short conversation if they want the community to support undergraduate housing from my point of view.
And I'm not saying that they do, and I'm not saying that they have approached me about it, but they have brought me in on several discussions with prospective developers to try and to understand where the numbers are. They have not asked me to do this. So, you know, I'm just professional staff looking at the market area and looking at, you know, some of the pinch points and making some recommendations for discussion. I just want to be real clear. Cornell has not said, we need you to do this.
Well, since a lot of their land is in the town of Ithaca, and then we go back to the previous discussion about expanding the geographic area, you know, maybe they would be part of that discussion.
Okay.
On expanding this as an opportunity.
Okay.
And in Cuba Heights as well. North Campus.
Right, yeah, right. So,
Yeah, I could see Hasbrook being a soon to be redeveloped. It's beyond its prime.
right. All right, well, this has really been, this has been great, really in-depth discussions. I appreciate the opportunity. And Teresa, anything to say before we close? Thank you for listening. All right, I don't want to put you on the spot. All right, well,
I now that I'm unmuted, I'm not sure that your job is housing. I think your job is to get people better jobs. And that would do a lot to make housing affordable.
I think we are, it's not either or, this is a both and. And we have found, I think we found a tool that's very powerful, and I'm glad that we're exploring how to grow it as an opportunity. So many thanks to Heather and Megan for diving into this, and Nels for also your expertise. So anything else? All right, so we'll expect to see some of your work over email in the next week or so, or 2 weeks. And look forward to setting another time to have a conversation probably, so.
Hey,
All right.
Laura, do you have a minute to stick around?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I'm gonna end our Zoom